Your alarm rings at 4:45 a.m. You don't have to answer it. Not anymore. For the last year, your investments have quietly earned more money than your job ever has. If you stayed in bed today, your bills would still get paid. Your future would keep growing. No paycheck is waiting on the other side of this morning. And yet, 5 minutes later, you're tying your work boots, pouring coffee into a travel mug, and driving toward another rooftop before sunrise. By 6 a.m., you're climbing a ladder with a toolbox slung over your shoulder. Sweat forms before the sun even clears the horizon. The younger apprentice steadying the ladder has no idea that the man above him could walk away forever. Your coworkers don't know. Your neighbors don't know. Even your family doesn't know. Which raises a question that matters far more than money. If financial freedom was the goal, why are you still here? The answer began nearly 2 decades earlier. You were 23, standing beside your father on a black roof in the middle of July. The heat radiating from the shingles felt like opening an oven and climbing inside. Your gloves were soaked through. Every tool burned your hands. 8 feet away, your father sat on an overturned bucket waiting for an air conditioning unit to cool. He had spent 34 years doing this. The skin on his hands had become thick and cracked. His fingers no longer closed completely. Years of gripping heavy equipment had quietly reshaped them. He never complained, not once. While eating the sandwich your mother packed that morning, he looked exactly as he had every summer of your childhood. Trying to fill the silence, you laughed and asked, "What are you finally going to quit?" He didn't even look up. He simply took another bite and said, "You get used to it." That was all. No lecture, no advice. Just 5 words. At the time, they sounded like surrender. Years later, you would realize they meant something entirely different. That same afternoon, reality hit harder than the summer heat. Standing in a grocery store checkout line, you were already calculating every item before the cashier scanned it. You knew your bank balance by memory. You also knew it wasn't enough. The total appeared. You were $11 short. Without saying a word, you reached into the bagging area and quietly removed 2 items. The cashier waited. The people behind you waited. Nobody laughed. Nobody judged. But somehow that made it worse. You carried the smaller grocery bags to your truck, tossed them onto the passenger seat, and sat behind the steering wheel without starting the engine. The metal was almost too hot to touch. For several minutes you stared through the windshield, imagining the next 40 years. More roofs, more overtime, more paychecks that disappeared before they arrived. One day, your hands would probably stop closing too. For the first time in your life, you weren't asking how to make more money. You were asking a different question. How do people stop trading their bodies for every dollar they earn? That question changed everything. The answer wasn't glamorous. There was no secret investment, no overnight millionaire, no shortcut. The idea was surprisingly simple. Own small pieces of businesses, keep owning them, give them time. That weekend, you opened your first investment account. Your finger hovered over one number. $500. More than half your savings. Immediately, your mind began producing perfectly reasonable excuses. What if the truck breaks down? What if you lose your job? What if an emergency happens next week? Every fear sounded responsible, which made them incredibly convincing. You stared at the screen for nearly 10 minutes. Then you realized something uncomfortable. Waiting for the perfect moment had never improved a single part of your life. So you pressed confirm. The balance dropped instantly. Nothing else happened. No fireworks, no applause, no feeling that your life had changed. Just a smaller number sitting in your account. By Monday morning, you were back on another roof. From the outside, absolutely nothing was different. Every payday after that, $50 disappeared into your investments before you had the chance to spend it. Month after month, year after year, The account barely seemed to move. Sometimes the market rose, sometimes it fell. Most weeks, it looked like nothing was happening at all. After 3 years, your portfolio had grown only slightly beyond the money you'd contributed yourself. The excitement was gone. The doubt wasn't. More than once, your thumb hovered over the button that would stop the automatic transfers forever. It felt pointless. It felt slow. It felt like everyone else was getting rich except you. But then another thought interrupted. If I quit now, all these years meant nothing. So you left the transfers running, not because you suddenly believed success was guaranteed, but because giving up would guarantee failure. Sometimes persistence begins with conviction. Sometimes it begins with refusing to waste the effort you've already invested. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, something happened that completely changed the way you saw money. You opened your investment app during a coffee break. A tiny notification appeared. Dividend received, $9. $9, hardly enough to buy lunch, yet you couldn't stop staring at it, because those $9 had arrived while you were asleep. You hadn't climbed a ladder, you hadn't worked overtime, you hadn't traded another hour of your life. For the first time ever, money had worked without asking your body to work first. The amount didn't matter. The realization did. That tiny dividend proved something your paycheck never could. There are only so many hours your body can sell, but ownership never clocks out. And sometimes the smallest payment becomes the biggest turning point because it changes not your bank account, but the way you see your future. Then, the market reminded you that investing isn't a straight line. One morning, you opened your portfolio and felt your stomach drop. Months of gains had vanished. The numbers kept falling. By the end of the week, your account had lost almost as much as an entire year of rent. For a moment, none of the books mattered anymore. The charts, the statistics, the long-term promises, all you could see was money disappearing. Your thumb drifted toward the sell button. One tap, and the bleeding would stop. At least, that's what fear whispered. But another thought was louder. If you sell now, you aren't protecting your future. You're protecting today's emotions. You closed the app. Friday came, just like every other payday. The automatic investment transferred another $50. The market didn't ask whether you felt confident. It didn't care whether the headlines sounded optimistic. It simply kept offering ownership at lower prices. That single decision would eventually become worth far more than every prediction you ignored. Because the greatest test of an investment strategy isn't starting it. It's refusing to abandon it when every emotion tells you to. The years kept moving. $10,000. You almost told your father. Standing in his driveway, watching him repair an old truck, the words reached the edge of your mouth. Dad. Before you could continue, he asked for another wrench. The moment disappeared. Later came $100,000, then $300,000. Each milestone felt impossible compared to the man who once couldn't afford $11 at the grocery store. Each time you promised yourself, this is the number I'll finally tell him. And every time you stayed quiet. Partly because it still felt unreal. Partly because deep down you feared turning progress into pride. The money kept growing. Your life barely changed. You still drove the same truck, still climbed the same ladders, still packed the same lunches. The biggest changes were happening somewhere no one else could see. Inside your habits, inside your patience, inside the quiet confidence built by doing the same small thing for nearly 2 decades. Then one ordinary night, everything changed. You weren't celebrating. You weren't checking your investments. You had opened a spreadsheet to calculate household expenses. 2 columns stared back at you. Income from work, income from investments. You compared them once, then again. Surely something was wrong. You checked the formulas. You recalculated every number by hand. The answer never changed. Your investments had quietly earned more this year than your full-time job. For 18 years, every early morning, every skipped purchase, every automatic transfer had been leading to this invisible moment. No applause, no notification, no one standing beside you. Just silence. You leaned back in your chair and stared at the screen. The dream that once seemed almost impossible had arrived so quietly that it barely announced itself. And suddenly, a question that had lived inside you for years returned. How do I tell Dad? Sunday finally arrived. You rehearsed the conversation during the drive. Dad, there's something I need to tell you. You imagined surprise, pride, maybe even disbelief. Instead, you walked into your parents' house and learned something you never expected. Your father had been retired for years, yet every Tuesday morning he still drove to the old repair shop. Nobody paid him. Nobody expected him to be there. He simply sat around a coffee pot with the same men he'd worked beside for decades, talking, laughing, remembering old jobs. You watched him smile while telling stories that didn't need an ending because everyone around the table already knew them. In that moment, something inside you shifted. All those years you believed your father stayed because he had no choice, but he had already proven otherwise. He had escaped the paycheck and still returned to the people. Financial freedom had never been the destination. Purpose was. Money had solved one problem. It had never promised to replace meaning. A few days later, you finally found the courage. The two of you stood alone in the parking lot outside the shop. You took a deep breath. Dad? He turned toward you. I've got about $900,000 invested. The words hung between you. You waited for the questions everyone else would ask. How did you do it? How much do you make? What's your secret? None of them came. Instead, he looked at you with the same calm expression he'd worn on every roof you'd ever shared. Then he asked, "You all right?" You nodded. He smiled. Then asked one more question. "What are you going to do with it?" You opened your mouth and realized you didn't have an answer. For 18 years, your entire goal had been reaching financial freedom. You had spent almost no time thinking about what came after. Your father already knew something the market could never teach. Money can buy options. Only purpose gives those options meaning. The next Monday morning, the alarm rang at 4:45 a.m. The same sound, the same boots, the same ladder, the same roof, waiting beneath another sunrise. The young apprentice looked up and asked the exact question you had asked your father. "What are you going to quit?" You smiled, not because you finally understood investing, because you finally understood him. Without looking up, you answered exactly the way he once had. You get used to it. Except now, those words meant something entirely different. You weren't climbing because you had to. You were climbing because you chose to. That was the real return on 18 years of investing. Not the $900,000, not the passive income, not even the freedom to leave. It was the freedom to stay. Because true wealth was never about escaping work. It was about reaching the point where every Monday morning becomes a choice instead of an obligation. That was the invisible fortune every $50 investment had really been buying all along.